If you're a Canon fanboy, then I'll save you the trouble. You can just hit the dislike button now because you probably won't like what I'm about to say. But I've read two very interesting articles that were published in the last day or two on EOS HD regarding aspects of Canon's video features that have come under criticism in recent weeks. The first is regarding the 24p, or the lack of. So in case you weren't aware or you've been asleep for the last few months, seemingly Canon no longer offer 24p recording in any of their mainstream cameras, which a lot of people say is odd because up until then they were offering 24p and they still offer higher frame rates of 30p and faster. So it doesn't take any additional processing power or any extra hardware to record in 24p than it does in 30. Now, I highlighted this in the last video I did about the 90D and M6 Mark II, and a few people put in the comments section a reason as to why there's no 24p option anymore, and I've seen the same reasoning posted on a few social media pages as well. But it seems, according to EOS HD, this reason is complete crap. The reason is to do with licensing fees. So the H.264 and H.265 video codecs that most camera companies use in their cameras isn't actually created by them. It's created by a consortium of other companies. They just distribute licenses to allow companies to use them. So the excuse being made is that Canon have dropped 24p so that they don't have to pay the licensing fees to use it and thus be able to reduce production costs and thus retail costs of their cameras. However, there's a few points that EOS HD report about as to why this is incorrect or irrelevant. Firstly, it seems that the H.264 license only covers using the H.264 codec. It makes no references that EOS HD could find, at least, to which frame rates you choose to use. So it seems whether you've got 24p or not, if you're using a H.264 codec for any video feature, then you pay the licensing fee anyway. Secondly, even if it was a separate licensing fee for H.264, how much money would they actually save? Basically nothing. If you are using H.264 in a product that sells less than 100,000 units, then the license is free. Over 100,000 up to 5 million units sold, the licensing costs 20 cents per unit. And then selling more than 5 million units, the price drops to 10 cents per unit. So at best case scenario, removing H.264 entirely from Canon cameras would save the consumer 20 cents. Is anyone going to split hairs about 20 cents on a $1,000 camera? Doubt it. Thirdly is that there's a financial cap on how much companies can be charged for the licenses. So the most that any one company can pay for the H.264 codec licenses is $6 million annually. Now, when you factor in that Canon aren't just using H.264 in their mirrorless and their DSLRs, they're also using it in the bridge cameras, the PowerShot cameras, their cine cameras, and also their camcorders, then they are already shifting huge numbers of units that they are paying licensing fees for. And the odds are is that they are already hitting that $6 million cap. So adding H.264 into new products thereafter isn't actually increasing the cost at all. So in summary, the licensing fee doesn't seem to be specific to 24p, just video in general, which they still include. Secondly, the most that it is costing them for having it is 20 cents per camera, but realistically it's more like nothing. So it seems we've gone back to the point that Canon haven't chosen to drop 24p for any benefit to anybody other than they presumably want to try and persuade people to buy higher end products. The second article on EOS HD sort of questions Canon's ethical integrity, and it's to do with their 4K video recording. So again, for the last few years, if you've been living under a rock, Canon have been heavily criticized for how they've handled 4K recording. For ages, while other companies were introducing 4K into everything, Canon introduced it into nothing. When they finally did start introducing it, they were using a 1:1 pixel readout. And if you're unaware, what a 1:1 pixel readout does is it reads every single pixel in an 8 megapixel section, which is the resolution of 4K, and produces a 4K readout from there. The downside to that is that none of the camera sensors it was being employed on were 8 megapixels. They were all 20 or 30 megapixels. And because it can't skip pixels, it needs to read the center 8 megapixels, and thus you get effectively a crop factor. So the likes of the 5D Mark IV with a 30 megapixel sensor gave a crop factor of about 1.7. With a 24 megapixel sensor, it gave a crop factor of about 1.6, which on the M50 is already an APS-C sensor, so you got a 1.6 crop on top of the 1.6 APS-C crop, which equates to about a 2.52 times crop. So if you were to put a 10mm lens on that camera and record in 4K, you would get effectively a 25mm field of view. Now, there was rejoicing when they announced the 90D and the M6 Mark II because it utilized the full area of the sensor. It didn't do full sensor readout like you get with the Sonys, where it records a full 6K and downsamples it to 4, but you're at least not getting a crop factor anymore. Brilliant. However, it's now come to light, according to EOS HD, that the 4K recording in the 90D and the M6 Mark II isn't 4K recording. It's actually 2.8K. So what's being reported is that Canon are employing pixel skipping, which is nothing new, but they're dropping 2 out of every 3 pixels. So you read a pixel, skip the next 2, read the next pixel, skip the next 2, so on and so forth. So with the 32 megapixel sensor skipping 2 out of every 3 and presumably 2 out of every 3 down as well, you don't get a 4K readout, you only get a 2.8K readout that Canon then upscales to 4K in camera to give you a 4K resolution file. But this brings in the ethical integrity because it's not capturing 4K. It's not 4K recording because it's not recording 4K of information. It's similar to smartphones. No, most smartphones don't have optical zoom lenses, they only have digital zoom. So when you pinch and zoom to make the picture bigger, all you're actually doing is just cropping into the picture. So in essence, it's no different whether you take a picture fully zoomed out and then pinch and zoom in later, or you pinch and zoom and then take the picture. You get exactly the same result. Now, if I take a picture on this fully zoomed out, I get a file resolution of 4608 by 3456 pixels. If I take another picture and I zoom all the way into 8 times zoom, I get a file resolution of 4608 pixels by 3456. Now obviously the picture that the second file is taking isn't really a 16 megapixel file. It's having to take a 16 megapixel sensor, read a very small portion, probably like, I don't know, a megapixel or 2 from the middle, and then blowing it up to 16 megapixels for no reason whatsoever. Some people might tell you, oh, well, it's upscaling it, it's using computer processing to fill in the gaps. Shite. You can't fill in information that doesn't exist. It kind of doesn't work. You can throw some sharpening on it to try and make it look better, but it's not actually adding the information that's never there. In essence, it would be like if Canon said, oh, the 90D and the M6 Mark II has a brand new 32 megapixel sensor, but then it turns out that it's not really a 32 megapixel sensor, it's the old 24 megapixel sensor, and they're just upscaling the image that it's produced. And that begs the question, do you think it's ethically wrong for Canon to say that the camera does 4K recording if it's not actually recording 4K? It's only exporting a 4K resolution file created from a 2.8K file. And the result would be no different than if you got the native 2.8K and then just scaled it up in post to a 4K timeline. But obviously that doesn't sound as good from the marketing point of view. But what do you make of this information? Do you think it's extremely wrong of Canon to try and mislead people in this way, or do you think it doesn't really make a difference at all? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.